Well, Ukrainians, greetings to you all. The biggest corruption scandal in all the years of Ukraine's independence, in the history of Ukrainian independence. I think that this case, the case of Mindich and his friends, there are a lot of names today, and I will be mentioning them to you as well. So this case might even surpass the adventures of Pavlo Lazarenko himself back in 1997. We were all waiting for this, though maybe we weren't sure if the Mindich tapes actually existed or if this story was really that serious and threatening. Basically, for officials, government members of the president's office, and in general for Ukraine's image, especially against the backdrop of, first of all, the large-scale war with the Russian Federation and the conditions under which Ukraine receives money from the European Union. Right now, it all comes together like a skewer with shashlik. Everyone loves shashlik. Everyone wanted this shashlik. Well, now we're going to get it. Today, more than 70 searches are being conducted in Ukraine by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. This is connected to large-scale abuses as stated by anti-corruption agencies involving Energoatom, the Ministry of Energy, as well as the name of such an infamous figure as Ukrainska Pravda writes, a friend of President Zelensky's, Volodymyr Zelensky's wallet. Perhaps I won't assert anything in the past. I'll simply state what is and what is being incriminated. Tymur Mindich. Tymur Mindich, let's get to the plot, but what's going on? Tymur Mindich, this information has also now appeared on Ukrainska Pravda, that he fled Ukraine shortly before the search. In fact, last night when things clearly started to heat up, Tymur Mindich left. I have already repeatedly reviewed the Mindich tapes, whether they exist or not, but I stated this fact that Tymur Mindich according to sources in the president's office, he was freely crossing the border back and forth. But now, obviously, we won't see him for a long time, although who knows, who knows. Right now, everything depends on the president's office, on the position of Volodymyr Zelensky himself. Because of what's happening in Ukraine's energy sector, the country is in lockdown, in blackout, in whatever you want to call it. The facilities turned out to be unprotected. Kudrytsky is being prosecuted for something. And here, it turns out, right under their noses, there are 1,000 hours of tapes on which, as the anti-corruption agencies claim, and they've already shown part of them today, it's documented how money is being stolen, as it turns out, in the Ukrainian energy sector. It's reported that not only Tymur Mindich has left Ukraine, but also people connected to him have left as well. Friends, colleagues, possibly business partners, these are the Zuckerman brothers. This still needs to be confirmed, although some members of parliament have such insider information and are writing about it. Now let's get to the essence of the case. So what exactly is happening? NABU is conducting searches at Mindich's properties. Well, that's how it's generally being described. NABU has released details about the operation to uncover extraordinary corruption in the energy sector. According to NABU, the criminal organization's main activity was the systematic receipt of unlawful benefits from Energoatom's contractors. They demanded 10 to 15% of the contract value. Energoatom's contractors were forced to pay kickbacks in order to avoid payment blocks or to retain their supplier status. This scheme was called the barrier. The leader of the criminal organization enlisted a former deputy of the State Property Fund of Ukraine and a former law enforcement officer. And by leveraging connections in the ministry and the company, they controlled personnel, procurement, and finances. And let's draw a conclusion right away. In other words, a strategic Ukrainian enterprise with revenues of over 200 billion hryvnias was actually under their control and management. Friends, now, here, I just don't know. It's beyond belief, under the control of unofficial officials, or to use a word some people like, the so-called overseers. These overseers are connected, of course, with certain surnames. NABU has also released some photo evidence online today. Just look at how wonderful things are at Energoatom. These were discovered during the searches. Well, dollars, bundles of dollars, cash, greenbacks. And notice there are also blue ones, brand new, just as they should be, freshly printed dollars, just stacks and stacks of cash and taxes. It's not reported exactly who this belongs to, but it was discovered during the searches. There are actually a lot of interesting stories there. NABU also released audio evidence, right? Yes, there are audio recordings, many minutes you can listen to. But the main thing that draws attention is this particular screenshot I'm showing you. it specifically relates to those so-called 10 to 15% kickbacks. There are different voices in the recordings, and they've been given names, like in a Shakespeare play. And so the so-called Tenor says, honestly, I just can't figure out how much money to bury, whether I need to or not, but I guess I should finish. At the same time, again, they offer 10, 0.10, but there are plenty of people willing to handle this money for 0.15. We could say that the Odessa guy can give it either to Rostic, or you can work with it unclearly. So 10, 15, 0.10, 0.15. In fact, well, this means it suggests that this is exactly the amount of kickbacks on certain contracts. So now just imagine the tenor regarding the tenor and so on and so forth. Who is this tenor, for example? Right now, there are a lot of guesses about who and how this person appeared, as indicated in these recordings. But obviously, and there are a lot of mentions now, I will specifically refer to the sources that we have in official non-fake Ukrainian media. So they write that the tenor is likely the executive director for physical protection and security at Energoatom Dmytro Baso. All of this still needs to be confirmed, and I think we will wait for official information. Next, there is also Professor Carlson and Rocket. So Carlson is likely the businessman Tymur Mindich, right? Professor is probably the former Minister of Energy, Herman Galushchenko. Rocket is probably Herman Galushchenko's advisor, Ihor Myronyuk, right? So there are a lot of conclusions to be drawn here, and here's another one. If we have actually been shown these particular recordings, isn't this, my friends, truly something to consider? Something to really think about? The Mindich tapes, isn't this is my question, aren't these the very same Mindich tapes that supposedly don't exist? Here are 1,000 hours of recordings. NABU says, well, friends, these are the Mindich tapes. It's them? It seems to me that it's exactly them. Next, even more, Herman Galushchenko. Today, during these searches and in the statements from anti-corruption agencies, there is a claim against the former Minister of Energy. Moreover, it's not just a claim, there's even talk of the story veering towards some kind of state treason and even collaborating with the aggressor. So how exactly? Well, today, Deputy Zalizniak is also posting a lot, commenting and writing specifically about Herman Galushchenko. It's just a mess, honestly. So you understand, our energy sector was still being run by the traitor Derkach. So Derkach, that's him in the lower left corner. That's Derkach, the person who's wanted, has a bunch of criminal cases and so on, fled, has been in the Russian Federation for a long time, or thank you, who knows where, right? NABU is conducting searches at the home of Serhiy Myronyuk, that's him at the top of the slide, who was previously an advisor to the Minister of Energy, Herman Galushchenko, and now they're writing that Myronyuk has been directly connected to Derkach the whole time, right? Well, I mean, the whole time. A person who works as a deputy handles affairs. Of course, this still needs to be proven in court and so on. But what has come to light, these things are, of course, absolutely. Now, let's take a moment to enjoy just a few more truly remarkable and unforgettable impressions which stand out for their uniqueness and impact. For example, consider the impression from Serhiy Prytula. Serhiy Prytula, a well-known public figure and respected commentator, simply could not remain silent and felt compelled to share his thoughts because the situation at hand is, to be honest, quite complicated, nuanced, and requires careful attention. It is a scenario that calls for the insights and opinions of experienced thought leaders and trusted voices in the community. So Prytula writes, when I see these piles of cash that turn up in important offices, in bags, in stacks, or just loose, I want to howl. Looking at these photos, how much money is there if you measure it as donations to the fund? How much essential equipment for defenders could have been bought but wasn't? Those who stole this money from their people and army during the war are state traitors. They should be sentenced to life in prison. And it's about time to implement a mechanism so that these funds, because no reasonable person would believe that this money was earned honestly or that it was just lying around somewhere as evidence in a criminal case. It should have been directed toward purchasing supplies for the military. I fully support this position. In the best case scenario, this money will start working in a few years, and in the worst case, we'll have to go searching for it in the forest together with a law enforcement officer who couldn't resist the temptation to pocket it. This is a reference to last week's incident involving one of the law enforcement officers who was sitting in the woods with a charger with a pile of cash. But I have one question also for Serhiy Prytula. Why doesn't Serhiy Prytula mention any names here? If someone is going to comment on this and is more or less informed, why are there no names mentioned? Why isn't there any direct address to the specific people who appointed these individuals to their positions, who are in fact officials managing these people? Why doesn't Serhiy Prytula want to point this out? Meanwhile, MP Bezukhla, I've also found her reaction for you, her impression of the NABU searches regarding the energy sector. Honestly, if this is truly an impartial investigation, then I'm very glad it's happening. I didn't understand why Kudrytsky is being accused, but Galushchenko is not. Why aren't they going after Mustafa Nayem? There is no rational explanation for this. All of them are connected to the state-of-art energy facilities. If it's everyone, then it should be everyone. But unfortunately, this is selective. There's also the question of why the SBU didn't see Russian influence in Energoatom. And what is Myronyuk going to do about this? That's a good question. I think we can consider this a parliamentary inquiry, because any public statement by a member of parliament, according to Ukrainian law, is considered such an inquiry. But it would be good to repeat this somewhere else in the Verkhovna Rada from the podium, and in general to convene some special sessions and listen to all of this and ask whether the government, well, the Ministry of Energy, which is so compromised, can continue as it is today. To be headed by the people who are currently in charge of it. Can these people continue to remain in the government, at least for the duration of the investigation? Regarding some other interesting details, I noticed that Mindich fled, but so far no one is commenting on this at all, except for Ukrainska Pravda. There is also a question here. Today, this question was posed to the spokesperson of the state, to the spokesperson of the State Border Guard Service, Demchenko. And Mr. Demchenko said that he does not have access, it turns out, to information about whether Mindich left or not. And here two questions arise. Wait a minute, the State Border Guard Service doesn't know who is leaving the country and who isn't. The State Border Service catches draft evaders, but it can't catch a person, a citizen of Ukraine of draft age, a person subject to military service, right? Tymur Mindich. How is that? This is a very weak response to the information request that exists today. Where is Tymur Mindich? Is he in Ukraine or is he not in Ukraine? It turns out the border service doesn't know. Second question, if the border service doesn't know, and if this information is classified as secret, maybe for the spokesperson, the official spokesperson of the border service, then maybe what we have here is a case of some extraordinary influence on the border guards who let Tymur Mindich out, knowing that he would be searched in the morning, and at night they let him out somewhere. And why, again, as someone liable for military service, I don't understand how this works. So for some, the country is closed, but for others, meaning for those who are wealthier, the country turns out to be open. Well, those are my impressions so far, of course, emotionally. I think I'll be coming back to this topic again in my future reviews, but for today, that's how it sounds. Next, what should we do with all this money now? All right, Prytula came up with the idea that it should be directed to the military. But what should be done in principle with this scandal, which obviously won't be put out quickly enough? I understand that it's possible. There are bloggers, political analysts, political technologists today who are also TV hosts now, including on some channels, who think that all of this, well, looks pretty uncertain, like drawing with a pitchfork on water. And so Volodymyr Zokin, if you follow his work on social media and on screen as well, you know who he is. So what does he write? Friends, we are starting to forget the Mindich tapes, and that's not right. This is irony now. These are the opponents. I just have to show this as well for balance. Let me remind you that about 6 months ago, several oligarchic groups came up with a new way to attack the government in the media. And they invented some scandalous tapes, allegedly recordings of Tymur Mindich, co-owner of Kvartal 95, who has been living in Israel for a long time. Well, you know, Tkach, Sevgil Musayeva, and obviously the National Anti-Corruption Bureau have different information. Since there is no case against Mindich, writes Volodymyr Zolkin, the old elites such as Poroshenko, the group of fugitive oligarchs from Vienna, Firtash, Novinsky, Bakhmatyuk, and the private group are left to resort to using the media, and here they work perfectly together with the Czech oligarch owner of Ukrainska Pravda, Thomas Fiala. Some parts of the fabricated conversations which were created and distributed for various reasons were not published to the public, but the question remains, who exactly is spreading Minich's story to a wider audience? Well, okay, that's how I personally perceive the position, but it is important to note that 1001 parts have already been published and made available. So here you can immediately counter Mr. Zolkin by saying, well, let's tell the whole truth, or at the very least update these posts accordingly to reflect the most accurate information. Next, my prediction follows. What will happen next? Right now, I'm reading yet another leak related to this case, and it gives the impression that this is just the beginning. This is the start of a fairly public process that awaits us, and I can say with 100% certainty that this will turn into a series. And this series will not only concern Energoatom, this series will obviously also concern the influence on financial institutions. In particular, Deputy Zalizniak is already writing that proceedings are being prepared regarding influence on Marathon, Sensbank, the Ministry of Energy, the Ministry of Ecology, and the State Property Fund of Ukraine. And finally, or for example, the connections that were finally exposed today, do you think there will be a response, so to speak? Will there be one or not? Will we see anything in return? Well, accordingly, yes, there is a track for anti-corruption law enforcement agencies. There is a track for law enforcement along the lines of the Prosecutor General's office. We saw throughout the summer and autumn how, in response to certain searches, the NABU and SAP conducted searches, and then the SBU did as well. Mariana Bezuchla is rightly asking what Myronyuk is going to do about all of this. We're waiting.